I noticed the manila envelope before he even said a word. Something about the way he tapped it, deliberate, almost rehearsed, sent a chill through me. Trent Whitaker had only been our division CEO for 6 months, but I already knew he didn't do anything by accident. And now, I was in his office on a Friday afternoon, alone. Madison, he began, leaning back in his ergonomic chair. How long have you been with us? 29 years, I replied. As of today. He nodded slowly, as if that number meant something to him. It didn't. It never had. My name is Madison Clark. I'm 61 years old. And until 5 minutes ago, I was the head of compliance at Holton Biotech's Midwest operations, headquartered in Chicago. I had given this company nearly 3 decades of my life. Long nights, missed holidays, the quiet pride of doing the kind of work no one sees but everyone depends on. I'd built my department from scratch. We'd gone from being under federal watch to receiving industry recognition for transparency. That wasn't luck. It was meticulousness, conviction, and frankly, sacrifice. 3 days from now, on Monday, my full pension was set to vest. Trent slid the envelope toward me. Due to ongoing budget realignments, today will be your last day. HR will process your severance package. We'll need your badge and company device before you leave. He said it like it was routine, just another cost-saving bullet point. But Holton Biotech had posted record-breaking quarterly profits just last week. This wasn't budget-driven. This was timed. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I'd reviewed enough exit interviews, enough legal memos, enough spreadsheets to know what was happening. I was being eliminated before my pension vested. That envelope on the desk? It was a trap, severance tied to silence. I picked it up without a word, thanked him for the opportunity, and walked out. The hardest part wasn't losing the job. It was realizing how disposable they thought I was. After everything. Janet from HR was waiting outside the office, eyes down, cheeks flushed. She escorted me to my desk like I was contagious. I packed my things quietly, a framed photo of my late husband, Thomas. The mug Elizabeth gave me before she moved to Denver. A 25-year service plaque I'd once been proud of. She whispered, "This isn't right." I nodded, but I didn't answer. Not because I agreed, but because I already knew. I'd known this day might come, and I had prepared for it. You see, for the past 4 years, I'd been tracking financial irregularities, subtle at first, then glaring. Expense reports that didn't align, inventory discrepancies, backdated certifications, and every time I flagged something I was told, "That's not your concern," or "We'll handle it at the executive level." Except, they didn't. They buried it, because exposure would cost them. And now, I was the cost. I drove home through the familiar streets of Hyde Park, rain streaking the windshield like quiet punctuation. My heart wasn't broken. It was resolute. Because what they didn't know, what Trent didn't know, was that while they were playing politics, I had been building a quiet, meticulous case. I had documents, emails, timestamps. I had proof. And I had one number in my phone I'd saved for exactly this moment. The only thing I needed now was to make the call. I didn't sleep much that night. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of stillness that makes every thought feel louder than it is. At 3:14 a.m., I made tea and sat at the small kitchen table where Thomas and I used to read the Sunday paper together. His chair sat empty across from me, the silence between us heavier than usual. I wondered what he would have said if he were still here. Probably something like, "Madison, you've always seen what others miss. Use that now." So I did. By sunrise, I had retrieved a steel lockbox from the back of my closet, buried behind rows of winter coats and holiday decorations no one had touched in years. Inside was 4 years' worth of quietly gathered truth. Internal memos, altered spreadsheets, emails forwarded to my personal account, notes I'd taken after late-night meetings where red flags were waved and promptly ignored. Not because I planned to use them, but because, deep down, I knew someday I might have to. Holton Biotech hadn't just let things slip. They'd manufactured illusions. They'd signed off on quarterly earnings with figures that didn't align. They'd pushed products out with quality control documents signed after shipments left the facility. They called it streamlining. I called it fraud. And now, they were counting on me to walk away quietly, with a 3-month severance check and no pension. They didn't expect me to call Gregory Ramos. Gregory had once been Holton's chief compliance officer, my counterpart on the East Coast, before he left to join the Securities and Exchange Commission. We'd only ever met once, at a national ethics symposium years ago. But I remembered him for one reason. He listened when others didn't. At 7:02 a.m., I pressed his name on my phone. He answered on the second ring. "Madison Clark? It's been a while." His voice hadn't changed. Measured, steady, curious. "It has," I said. "Gregory, I think I need to blow the whistle." There was a pause, then a quiet shift in tone. "I'm listening." For the next hour and 43 minutes, I walked him through what I had. The documentation, the timeline, the patterns. I told him about the backdated certifications, the manipulated expense reports, and the termination timed 3 days before my pension would vest. "This isn't just wrongful termination," he said. "This is securities fraud, possibly criminal. You're doing the right thing, Madison, but you'll need to move carefully." He explained the protections available under the SEC's whistleblower program, what to document, and what not to say to anyone at Holton without counsel. He arranged a secure, in-person meeting for Monday morning with a legal team in downtown Chicago. "Don't sign anything," he warned. "Not even if they show up at your door." By noon that day, I had organized everything. 3 full evidence packets, indexed and time-stamped. 1 copy for the SEC, 1 for my records, and 1, just in case, for leverage. My phone started ringing around 2 p.m. First, it was Janet from HR, then Holton's legal team, then Trent himself, all urging me, some politely, others not, to sign the severance agreement before close of business. I didn't return a single call. By 4:45 p.m., there was a knock at my door. Through the peephole, Trent Whitaker, standing on my porch in a $2,000 suit, looking like he'd just been told the building was on fire. "Madison, let's be reasonable," he called out. I didn't respond. He slid a second envelope into my mailbox. "Final opportunity," the note read. "Signed by 9:00 a.m. Monday." I closed the door. I made another cup of tea. Because Monday would be the beginning of something they weren't ready for. Monday morning came with a strange sense of calm. I woke up before my alarm, dressed in my navy blue suit, the one I usually reserved for audits or court depositions, and took a long look in the mirror. Not to fix anything, just to remember what resilience looked like. The sky was overcast as I drove downtown to the Federal Building where Gregory had arranged our meeting. Traffic moved slow, like the city itself sensed something big was coming. Maybe it was just me. At the security checkpoint, I handed over my ID, my phone, my briefcase. I kept only one thing in hand, a small leather folder containing 4 years' worth of truth. My truth. Gregory greeted me in the lobby. He looked older than I remembered, a few more lines around the eyes, but the same quiet sharpness. He led me into a glass-walled conference room where 2 others were waiting. Angela Brennan, a senior enforcement attorney, and James Weston, a forensic accountant with eyes like he could spot fraud in your handshake. They were polite but serious. "Mrs. Clark," Angela said, "before we begin, please know that once you disclose what you've brought today, an investigation becomes official. There's no turning back." "I understand," I replied, "and I'm ready." What followed was nearly 3 hours of detailed walkthroughs, spreadsheets, quality control reports, email threads, executive memos. I showed them how documentation had been altered, how compliance reports were rerouted directly to Trent's office after he joined, and how financials were overstated by nearly 20% over the past 2 years. James scanned one report, whistled under his breath, and said, "These aren't just oversights. This is structured manipulation. This is big." I nodded, though it still hurt to hear it aloud. This was my company, my work, and they'd poisoned it from the top down. Angela asked, "Do you believe your termination was in retaliation for reporting these findings internally?" "Without question," I said. "The timing wasn't just suspicious, it was surgical. 3 days before pension vesting. That's not cost-cutting. That's erasure." We wrapped the meeting with formal statements and signed documents. Angela told me the SEC would move quickly. This wasn't a gray area case. The evidence was extensive, and the potential violations serious. I wasn't even halfway home when my phone buzzed. Janet from HR. Her voice was tight, like she was trying not to panic. "Madison, something's happening," she whispered. "The board just called an emergency meeting. Trent's been locked in his office all morning. There's talk that the SEC contacted our legal team." I couldn't help it. I laughed, not out of joy, but out of the sheer absurdity of it all. So fast. Faster than I ever imagined. "I'm not surprised," I told her. "But Janet, please understand. I did what I should have done a long time ago." She didn't say anything, just exhaled shakily before hanging up. An hour later, another call came, this time from William Hargrove, the chairman of the board. A man I'd seen maybe 5 times in nearly 3 decades, always from a distance, always looking through me rather than at me. "Miss Clark," he said, his voice unusually strained, "we seem to have a situation that requires your input. Would you be willing to meet with us tomorrow?" "I'm afraid that won't be possible," I replied coolly. "Any discussions moving forward will need to include my attorney and may involve representatives from the SEC. I'm sure you understand." The pause on the other end said everything. Too late. You had your chance. And you wasted it. That evening, I sat in my living room with a glass of wine and the lights dimmed low. Elizabeth called from Denver, her voice full of worry. "Mom, are you okay? You sound different." "I was terminated Friday," I told her simply. "What?" "But your pension." "I know," I said. "They did it anyway, but don't worry, I'm handling it. Do you want me to come home?" "No, sweetheart, I've got this." When we hung up, I stared out the window into the fading dusk. For years, I'd been the quiet one, the rule follower, the steady hand in a storm no one else saw coming. But now, I was the storm. Holton Biotech wanted a quiet exit. They wanted me to disappear into retirement without a fuss. But they made one miscalculation. They underestimated me. And they forgot one simple truth. I had nothing left to lose, and everything to reveal. By Wednesday morning, the storm had fully landed. I didn't have to read the headlines to know. My phone was buzzing with messages from former coworkers, ex-clients, even people I hadn't spoken to in years. The word was out. The SEC was investigating Holton Biotech. The company's stock had already dropped 18% by noon. Analysts who had praised Trent's efficiency just weeks ago were now tearing into the company's financial credibility. It was surreal. But what came next? That truly floored me. At 2:12 p.m., I received an email from Holton's legal department. It was cold and clinical, of course, but its contents were explosive. They were rescinding my termination. Effective immediately, I was being placed on paid administrative leave with full benefits pending an internal review. Are you serious? After the humiliation? The security escort? The envelope in my mailbox like I was some kind of criminal? I wanted to scream. Too little. Way too late. The next morning, I met with my attorney, Barbara Ramos. No relation to Gregory, though the coincidence gave us both a small laugh. We reviewed Holton's new offer, and as expected, it was nothing more than a legal band-aid. A transparent attempt to soften the blow, before it became lethal. "They're scrambling," Barbara said, flipping through the documents. They're terrified of what else you might have. I smiled faintly. They should be. That same day, Holton requested a formal meeting with me. This time, they wanted the conversation in person, with board members present. But now, I set the terms. The meeting took place Friday morning in the same boardroom where I'd once presented a full compliance review no one had bothered to read. Except now, the air was thick with tension. William Hargrove was there. 3 other board members, outside counsel. But Trent Whitaker? Conspicuously absent. Interesting. Barbara sat to my left, calm but ready. I stayed quiet as William opened with what sounded like a well-rehearsed statement about corporate transparency and corrective direction. When he finally paused, Barbara leaned forward. Let's be clear, Mr. Hargrove. Ms. Clark didn't raise these concerns post-termination. She reported them repeatedly over 4 years, and she was ignored. William shifted uncomfortably. Yes, well, that's part of what we're reviewing. I'm not here for window dressing, I said firmly. I'm here because you made me invisible for years, and now, suddenly, you need me to clean up the mess you helped create? No one answered. They just sat there, blinking. They offered me a reinstatement. They offered my pension, backdated. They even offered a consulting role, a pathetic gesture to make it seem like I still belonged. It was almost laughable, but I didn't laugh. I looked them in the eye and said, I will cooperate fully with the SEC and with any internal review. But I won't be silenced, I won't be used, and I won't pretend this company did right by me when it didn't. The meeting ended shortly after. No handshakes, no apologies. As Barbara and I walked out, she whispered, That was perfect. But I didn't feel victorious. Not yet. Just clear. Clear on what needed to happen next. Because this wasn't about me anymore. It was about every single person who had been stepped on, shut down, or pushed out. And now the whole world was finally watching. By Monday morning, Holton Biotech was in freefall. The media had caught up. The headlines weren't just local anymore. They were national. SEC launches federal investigation into Holton Biotech's financial reporting practices. Whistleblower alleges years of fraud, retaliatory termination. And then the name dropped. Madison Clark. I wasn't ready to be known, but there it was. My name, printed and reposted, suddenly synonymous with courage, accountability, and exposure. Honestly, it was overwhelming. Too many emails, too many calls. People praising me, asking for interviews, offering speaking gigs. I turned them all down. This wasn't a brand. This wasn't a campaign. It was truth. And it was still unfolding. That morning, Gregory called with an update. Madison, he said, voice taut with intensity, it's worse than we thought. I took a breath. How bad? There are financial discrepancies going back at least 5 years. David, Trent, didn't start it. He just made it bigger, faster, sloppier. That stopped me cold. 5 years? That meant multiple C-suite leaders. It meant board-level knowledge. It meant they all knew. How far up does this go? I asked. Far enough that several board members are now under separate review, Gregory replied. We have evidence that they signed off on transactions that artificially inflated company value before a major acquisition. This wasn't mismanagement, Madison. It was intentional deception. I sat in stunned silence. I'd known something was wrong, but this? This was rot all the way to the core. And then, as if on cue, the next shoe dropped. That afternoon, Trent Whitaker gave a carefully staged interview with a major business outlet, calm, measured, smug as ever. He claimed that I had performance issues, that I was bitter over being passed up for a promotion, that I'd misinterpreted the data, and this whole investigation was an overreaction driven by a personal vendetta. I was furious, livid. How dare he, after 30 years of spotless performance reviews, after being dragged out 3 days before my pension? After staying silent longer than I should have, out of respect for the company, for the people, and now he was calling me unstable? I didn't respond publicly, but I didn't have to, because I still had one more card left to play. At sunrise the next day, I drove to my bank and unlocked a safe deposit box I'd nearly forgotten about. Inside, a sealed envelope I'd tucked away 3 years earlier. Back then, I hadn't understood what I was looking at, but something told me to keep it safe. The envelope contained email exchanges between Holton's former CEO and two board members, discussing how to reclassify certain revenue streams in the months leading up to a critical merger. One email literally said, "If the numbers don't add up, we find another formula. Madison's team doesn't need to see this." Unbelievable. They knew I was a problem before I even knew it myself. I scanned and emailed the documents directly to Gregory. His reply came within minutes. "This changes everything." What followed was a domino effect. By that afternoon, Holton Biotech had called a second emergency board meeting. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be. Gregory texted me from the federal building. "3 board members just resigned. Trent is cornered." The news broke faster than the company could contain it. By evening, Holton's stock had dropped another 12%, bringing total losses to nearly 30% in a single week. Investor confidence? Gone. Analysts were calling it a systemic failure of governance. And still, I didn't feel joy. Not exactly. Just clarity. That night, as I sat with a mug of chamomile tea, watching the news scroll silently across the screen, I realized something. This wasn't revenge. It was accountability. There's a difference. My phone buzzed again. It was Janet from HR. "Madison, the interim CEO would like to meet with you. Tomorrow, if you're willing." I hesitated. "Who's the interim CEO?" "Patricia Donovan." That name surprised me. Patricia had been COO, always professional, always distant, but never dismissive. She was one of the few executives who had treated me like a person instead of a policy. "Tell her I'll meet," I said. But not at Holton. At my attorney's office. The next morning, Patricia arrived, looking exhausted but composed. She carried a new manila envelope, but this one, for the first time, didn't feel like a weapon. "Madison," she said quietly, "you didn't just uncover misconduct. You exposed a culture, one that allowed deception to thrive. That ends now." She slid the envelope across the table. Inside, full reinstatement, retroactive, immediate pension vesting, 5 years salary and compensation, full health care for life, a written apology from the board. I closed the folder gently. I didn't speak right away, and when I finally did, I simply asked, "And Trent?" Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Fired, for cause. Criminal charges pending." For the first time in this entire saga, I felt something close to peace. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom, watching as Trent Whitaker stood before the judge, his posture slumped, his suit wrinkled, his arrogance long gone. He wasn't alone. 2 former board members stood beside him, each facing charges related to securities fraud, falsification of financial records, and conspiracy to mislead federal regulators. When Trent turned slightly and our eyes met, he didn't glare. He didn't smirk. He didn't plead. He just looked small. And I realized it wasn't me he recognized. It was what I represented, consequences. I had never wanted this role. I never dreamed of becoming a whistleblower, let alone a cautionary tale etched into corporate ethics textbooks. But here I was, being cited in business schools, in legal journals, and in compliance panels across the country as the woman who exposed Holton Biotech. At first, the attention was uncomfortable. I wasn't used to people listening when I spoke, much less looking to me for guidance. But then, something shifted. Other compliance officers began reaching out, quietly, gratefully, sharing their own documentation, their own stories of being dismissed, silenced, or pressured. My story had become a spark, and maybe a shield. I declined the offer to return as a consultant at Holton. There was nothing left for me there. Instead, I accepted a position with a federal agency, helping design stronger whistleblower protection protocols. I wanted to make sure the next person in my shoes wouldn't have to choose between truth and survival. The SEC awarded me a substantial payment, 15% of the fines Holton was forced to pay. I used a portion of it to establish a scholarship fund for young women pursuing careers in compliance, ethics, or regulatory law. I named it after Thomas. He always believed my attention to detail was more than just a personality trait. "It's your superpower, Mads," he used to say. Maybe he was right. Elizabeth moved back to Chicago with my grandkids. We bought a small lakeside home, quiet and warm, where we spend our weekends watching the water and rebuilding time we once lost to late-night spreadsheets and forgotten birthdays. One evening, as the sun slipped below the horizon, Elizabeth asked, "Do you regret staying at Holton all those years?" I thought about it. "No," I finally answered. "I regret what they did. I regret who they became, but I don't regret who I was there." I held the line. And that, more than anything, was what mattered. Because sometimes justice doesn't look like a headline. It looks like peace. And for the first time in a long time, I had it. The following spring, Holton Biotech was unrecognizable. A new CEO, a restructured board, a drastically reduced market share. Their annual report included a section titled Lessons in Ethical Reform. I read it carefully, as I always had. Only this time, my name was referenced in a footnote. Anonymous whistleblower whose diligence initiated federal review. I smiled. They still couldn't say it outright, but the world already knew. That was enough. I spent more time at the lake now, mornings with coffee and birdsong, evenings with my grandkids curled under quilts. The peace I once thought I'd never feel again had returned in quiet waves. Sometimes I caught myself thinking about those last days at Holton. The folder on Trent's desk, the silence in the hallway, the way people looked away as I packed my things. It still hurt, just not in the same way. Because now I understood something deeper. They didn't just try to deny me my pension. They tried to erase my value. But I didn't let them. I documented the facts. I told the truth. And when the time came, I didn't flinch. Some people say I was brave. Maybe. But I don't think of it that way. I think of it as choosing alignment between what I knew and what I did. And in the end, that alignment gave me everything they tried to take. Not just compensation, not just vindication, but wholeness. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't have to scream to be heard. Sometimes, quiet strength is the kind that changes everything. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or pushed aside, this story is for you. Not just to inspire, but to remind you. Your silence isn't their safety net. Your truth has weight. What would you do if your company tried to erase you right before retirement? Have you ever stayed quiet when you should have spoken up? Share your story below. I read every comment. Let's build a space where no one stands alone in the shadows again. I gave that company 22 years of my life. I knew the job like the back of my hand. But when the new boss walked in, he didn't see experience. He saw expense. And within weeks, I was out, replaced by the very intern I had mentored. But what they didn't know was, I wasn't done yet. Let me take you back to where it all started. My name is Sarah, and I worked in the finance department of a mid-sized logistics firm just outside of Cincinnati. I started there back when we still did paper invoices and used fax machines. Back then, we were just 12 people, packed into a one-room office with flickering lights and broken coffee machines. I stayed through 3 relocations, 4 CEOs, and more layoffs than I can count. But I never left, because I believed in what we were building. I believed in loyalty. And for over 2 decades, I was the steady pair of hands that kept the books balanced, vendors happy, and cash flow clean. No fancy titles, no corner office, just results. Real ones. The kind that keep companies alive. Then came Lucas. He was the new VP of Operations, freshly imported from some shiny consulting firm in Chicago. MBA, expensive haircut, skinny tie, full of buzzwords like agile transformation and synergy acceleration. He looked at the company like it was a game of chess, one he intended to win fast, no matter who got knocked off the board. From the moment Lucas walked in, something shifted. He didn't want to understand how things worked. He wanted to reinvent them. And to do that, he needed to make space, cut costs, streamline departments, trim the fat. Apparently, I was part of that fat. But he didn't come for me directly. He smiled in meetings, called me institutional wisdom, asked me to train a new intern, Chloe, a bright, bubbly 23-year-old fresh out of college. She was sweet, curious, eager to learn. I took her under my wing, walked her through every spreadsheet, every process, gave her shortcuts I'd learned over decades. She reminded me of myself, in a way, but I had no idea she would be stepping into my shoes. Just weeks later. It started small. I was no longer CC'd on certain emails. Meeting invites stopped coming in. Lucas started directing Chloe to sit in on client calls. I chalked it up to mentorship. I wanted her to grow. Then came the Friday morning I'll never forget. Lucas called me into his office, smiling that same corporate smile, and said, "Sarah, we're going in a new direction. Your role has been made redundant. This has nothing to do with performance. It's a structural change." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My throat closed up. My hands trembled. 22 years, gone with one sentence. They offered me a 2-week severance and an HR packet. No handshake, no thank you. And Chloe? She moved into my desk on Monday. Didn't even look me in the eye. Maybe she was told not to. Maybe she felt guilty. Maybe she didn't care. I went home that day numb. Sat in my car for nearly an hour before I could even turn the key. I wasn't just fired. I was erased. Like I never existed. Like none of it had mattered. But here's the thing about underestimating someone like me. You never see the storm coming. Until it's already too late. I wish I could say I bounced back quickly. I didn't. The first few weeks after being let go were a haze. I woke up at 6 a.m. every morning, like clockwork, only to remember I had nowhere to go. The silence in my apartment was deafening. I missed the hum of the office printer, the clatter of keyboards, the morning coffee runs, even the annoying squeak from the chair in the conference room. But most of all, I missed purpose. And that's when the humiliation really sank in. It wasn't just that I'd been fired, it was how it happened. Quietly, without recognition, without gratitude. After 22 years of loyalty, I was disposed of like an outdated file. And Chloe, someone I had poured knowledge and patience into, had stepped into my place without hesitation. I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt at first. Maybe she didn't know. Maybe she wasn't given a choice. But when I checked LinkedIn one afternoon, her new title was front and center, finance associate, full-time. And there she was, smiling in a group photo, arms crossed, standing right in front of the whiteboard I used to scribble on during Monday meetings. Worse still, the caption read, "Excited to be part of a forward-thinking team that values fresh ideas and innovation over tradition." That hit harder than the pink slip. And then, I started hearing things. A former colleague, Melissa from accounting, texted me late one night. "You okay? It's a mess over here. Chloe's in over her head. Lucas is losing patience but pretending everything's fine. He's even using your old budgeting template like it's his idea." My stomach turned. That spreadsheet had taken me months to refine. I had used it to save the company from 2 near cash flow crises. Now Lucas was rebranding it, and Chloe was presenting it, clumsily, to clients I had built relationships with for years. And they were getting frustrated. Another message came in the next week from a long-term vendor. "Did you leave? Haven't heard back from anyone on the new invoice system. Confused who to contact. Hope all is well." I realized something then. They had replaced me on paper, but not in substance. Lucas might have wanted cheap, but cheap doesn't mean capable. And Chloe, bless her heart, wasn't ready for the pressure of quarterly audits, cash projections, or vendor negotiations. She was trying, sure, but she was drowning in a pool she didn't even know she was in. And Lucas, he was too arrogant to admit the cracks were showing. That's when my emotions shifted. The numbness, the sadness, they gave way to something sharper, cleaner, anger. Not the explosive kind, but the kind that simmers, the kind that makes you sit up straighter, think clearer, move smarter. They had underestimated me. I had built relationships in that company that went beyond job titles. I knew every pattern in the cash flow cycle. I understood our clients, what made them stay, what made them leave. I saw things Lucas never bothered to ask about. And now, those blind spots were going to cost him. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to argue. I didn't need to, because I still had one thing Lucas never would: credibility. And credibility, in business, is everything. I started making a few quiet phone calls. Nothing dramatic, just friendly catch-ups with people who mattered. Clients, vendors, a retired board member who still had influence. I didn't ask for anything, just reconnected. Reminded them I was still around, still sharp, still someone they could trust. And the more I listened, the more I realized the storm was already coming. Lucas just hadn't looked up yet. It's strange how quiet things can get when you've been cut off from a place you once called your second home. My email account was deactivated, my company badge useless. Even old coworkers were hesitant to reach out. I wasn't just gone. It was as if I'd never existed. It felt personal, too personal. But I didn't wallow, not for long. Instead, I watched. I listened. The updates kept coming, casual mentions from former coworkers, even whispers from clients who had no idea I was no longer with the company. I didn't seek them out. They came naturally. That's what happens when you've spent decades earning trust. People remember. And what I kept hearing wasn't good. Chloe had stepped into my role, but the shoes were far too big. Mistakes on reconciliations, missed follow-ups with key vendors, errors in quarterly projections. The team was covering for her, but they were tired. And Lucas? He was doubling down, pretending everything was under control. He couldn't admit that his cost-saving move was starting to bleed. One of the client managers I used to work closely with reached out in frustration. "Sarah, who's running things over there now? They sent me the wrong invoice twice. It's like they're guessing at numbers." Too disappointing for words. Another vendor emailed me personally, even though I wasn't supposed to be reachable. "Are you still overseeing accounts? Something's off. No one seems to understand how the net terms work." It made me want to scream. How could they be this reckless? But what hit hardest was an old team member, Jenna from payroll, messaging me on LinkedIn one night. "I miss you, Sarah. Things aren't the same. Honestly, they're falling apart. Chloe's overwhelmed and Lucas doesn't care. It's awful." That one hurt. Because despite everything, I didn't hate Chloe. I knew she didn't ask for this. She'd been used, pushed into a role she wasn't trained for by a man who thought experience was overrated and loyalty was irrelevant. Lucas hadn't just replaced me. He had dismantled something that worked and replaced it with smoke and mirrors. And for what? A few dollars saved on a salary line? I began journaling everything I was hearing. I didn't plan to use it, at least not yet. But something told me this wasn't over. The company I gave 22 years to was slowly unraveling, thread by thread. And I wasn't even in the room. The irony? Lucas had built his image on being a savior, the young exec who modernized a stale old system. He gave interviews, shared motivational quotes, even posted a podcast episode titled "Cutting Costs Without Cutting Corners." What a joke! He had no idea what was really holding things together before he arrived. No clue that corners often hid the people quietly doing the work that made his job easier. And now he was discovering what happened when those people disappeared. Still, I wasn't out for revenge. Not yet. Part of me still hoped maybe someone would reach out. Maybe Lucas would admit he made a mistake. Maybe the company would see the cracks before it was too late. But then, 3 months after I'd been let go, I got a call from someone I never expected to hear from. His name was Carl, a soft-spoken man in his 60s who used to serve on the board years ago. He had since retired, but still held shares and had enough clout to make waves when necessary. He said, "Sarah, I've heard some troubling things. Tell me honestly, is it true Lucas let you go and replaced you with an intern?" I didn't lie. I laid it all out, calmly, factually. No bitterness, just the truth. Carl was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "That's outrageous." He didn't elaborate much after that, just thanked me and said he'd be making some inquiries. I hung up, stunned. Could this actually be the beginning of something? Was someone finally paying attention? I didn't know what Carl would do, but I knew this much. If he was asking questions, others soon would too. And if Lucas thought the worst was behind him, he was in for one hell of a surprise. After I hung up with Carl, I sat there in stunned silence. I hadn't expected anyone to care, let alone someone like him. But he had listened, really listened, and his reaction wasn't lukewarm. It was outrage. That gave me something I hadn't felt in a while. Hope. Still, I didn't count on a miracle. I'd been in the corporate world long enough to know that outrage doesn't always lead to action. But something had shifted. I could feel it. Carl wasn't just a retired board member. He was the kind of man who asked questions when he already suspected the answers. And it wasn't long before the ripples began. A former client, one of our biggest accounts from the Midwest, called me out of the blue. He sounded annoyed, borderline panicked. "Sarah, we've been trying to get answers on last quarter's reconciliation. Nobody's giving us a straight story. You wouldn't happen to be consulting on the side now, would you?" I smiled, almost laughed. Too unbelievable. Just 3 months ago, they kicked me out like a relic of the past. And now their top client was chasing me. We set up a call. Nothing formal, just a friendly review. I walked him through what I would have done had I still been in charge. He took notes, asked if he could loop me in again the following week. 1 call became 3. 3 became 5. I wasn't just back in the game. I was building something new, on my terms. It was empowering, but it was also bittersweet. Part of me still wrestled with the betrayal. Every time I thought of Chloe, sitting at my desk, presenting half-baked spreadsheets I once pored over late at night, I felt a sharp sting of disbelief. How did it come to this? How could someone like Lucas be given so much power and use it so carelessly? But now I had clarity. Lucas hadn't made a strategic decision. He had made an ego move, one based on arrogance, not vision. And Chloe? She was simply collateral damage, set up to fail so he could justify further changes. It made me sick, but anger without action? That wasn't me. So I started moving, not loudly, but deliberately. I reached out to a few old vendor contacts, offered free consultations to some struggling small businesses, and began quietly positioning myself as a trusted advisor in financial operations. The response was overwhelming. Apparently, experience did still matter. One evening, while reviewing an old invoice structure I'd once customized for our biggest client, I got another call, this time from Jenna, the payroll colleague who'd messaged me earlier. Her voice was quiet, cautious. "You didn't hear this from me," she said, "but there was a meeting yesterday, a heated one. Carl was there. He asked very specific questions. About you, about the intern, about missing documentation." Lucas turned pale. My heart skipped. Was it finally happening? Then Jenna added something that made my jaw drop. Carl asked for copies of the last 2 quarterly reports, not the ones Lucas polished for presentation. He asked for the raw data. I couldn't believe it. After months of being silenced and replaced, the truth was finally being unearthed. It was too early to celebrate, but I allowed myself a small smile. Because when people like Carl start digging, they don't stop until they hit the bottom. The moment Jenna told me Carl was digging through raw financials, I knew the clock had started ticking. Lucas had built his empire on polished decks and inflated projections, but raw data doesn't lie. And if Carl was smart, and he absolutely was, he'd start to see the patterns I had spent years managing and correcting. The timing, the gaps, the numbers that didn't quite add up unless you understood the business. I didn't need to lift a finger, because Lucas had already sown the seeds of his own downfall. All I had to do was stay ready. Meanwhile, word was spreading. Vendors who hadn't heard from the company in weeks started reaching out to me directly, asking for help with unpaid invoices or lost records. One of them even said, "We used to love working with your team. Now it's chaos over there. What happened?" What happened? Lucas happened. That's what. I started consulting part-time. Quietly, I helped 3 vendors restructure their receivables. One client asked me to audit their books to ensure they weren't being overcharged under the new partnership with Lucas's firm. They were, by over 12%. Too outrageous. I wasn't just rebuilding my reputation, I was reclaiming my identity. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. And that's when the email came. Not from Jenna, not from Carl, from Chloe. The subject line was just one word: sorry. I opened it, unsure what to expect. Inside, a message that felt equal parts apology and confession. "Sarah, I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I have to tell someone. I didn't know Lucas planned to replace you. I thought I was shadowing you to support you. The day they let you go, he told me it was your idea to step down. I only realized the truth later, and by then, it was too late. I'm so sorry. I think I'm in way over my head. I don't know what to do." I sat back in my chair, stunned, so it was a lie. A manipulative one. Lucas had told Chloe I chose to leave, that I had stepped aside. No wonder she hadn't looked me in the eye. She didn't betray me. She was used, just like everyone else. How disgustingly clever of him. But Chloe's message wasn't just an apology. It was an opening. I replied, "I appreciate your honesty. You didn't deserve to be caught in this. Neither did I. If you need help, I'll guide you. But understand this. Lucas's actions have consequences, and they're coming." We arranged a video call. She looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes, her once bubbly tone now flat. She'd been working weekends, trying to stay afloat. Lucas had been micromanaging her, blaming her in meetings when things went wrong, but still propping her up publicly to maintain the illusion of success. What a coward. But during our conversation, she shared something critical. "Lucas told me to use the Q1 smoothing model you left behind. But when I asked him how it worked, he said to just trust the formula." My heart dropped. That model was a forecasting template I'd built, with one key caveat. It only worked when paired with detailed vendor schedules and seasonal cash flow offsets. Without that context, it would create a wildly inaccurate picture of revenue timing. Oh no. If Lucas had used that in an investor report, and then Chloe said it. He used it for the board update. He said it made the numbers look stronger going into Q2. That was it. That was the nail. He hadn't just cut me out. He'd misused a proprietary tool he didn't understand to present a false sense of security to leadership. I hung up, my mind racing. The storm was no longer coming. It was already here. Now, it was just a matter of who would be standing when it passed. By the time Chloe told me about the Q1 smoothing model, I knew the house of cards was seconds from collapse. Lucas had crossed a line he couldn't walk back from, presenting inflated financials based on a tool he didn't understand, to a board that trusted him blindly. And worst of all, he had done it thinking no one would question him. But Carl wasn't just questioning anymore. He was investigating. 2 days later, Jenna messaged me again. "Lucas got pulled into a closed-door meeting with the board this morning. It didn't sound friendly." And then came the email I never thought I'd see. Subject: confidential, request for discussion. From Carl. He asked if I'd be willing to walk him through the real structure of the model Lucas had misused. I agreed, but on one condition: that the conversation be transparent, documented, and shared with the board. Carl replied within minutes, "Absolutely. Malti, we need the truth now more than ever." What followed was a 90-minute call that felt like a courtroom testimony. I laid it out, everything, from the dependencies of the forecasting model, to the missing cash flow controls, to the actual year-over-year dips Lucas had buried under optimistic formulas. Carl listened carefully, asked pointed questions, and took notes. When it ended, he said just one thing: "Thank you, Sarah. You may have saved this company." I logged off and stared at my screen in disbelief. Had it really come full circle? The next morning, news broke internally. Lucas was suspended pending a full audit. Chloe forwarded me the memo, and at the bottom was a line that made me audibly gasp. "Effective immediately, the board has retained former senior finance advisor Sarah Whitmore as a temporary consultant to assist with reconciliation and recovery efforts." I was speechless. Just 3 months ago, I was shown the door without so much as a goodbye. Now, they were asking me to help clean up the mess. It was too surreal for words. And yet, I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. Because what came next would define not just me, but the future of everyone who had been caught in Lucas's storm. Walking back into that office felt like stepping into the ghost of a life I'd already buried. Everything looked the same. Same break room, same flickering hallway light. But the energy was different. People greeted me with a mix of surprise and quiet relief. Some even looked hopeful. That part caught me off guard. I wasn't there to take revenge. I was there to restore order. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel good to be back on my terms. Lucas, meanwhile, was gone. After the internal audit exposed the extent of his misrepresentations, he was formally terminated. No farewell party, no thank you speech. Just a silent vanishing act. Exactly the kind of exit he had once orchestrated for me. Poetic, really. Chloe resigned a week later. We had one final conversation, this time without guilt or pretense. She thanked me sincerely and said she needed time to figure out who she really was, outside the shadows of people like Lucas. I respected that. She had been used just like the rest of us. My role as a consultant wasn't permanent, but in 3 months, I stabilized what had been broken. I reinstated clean systems, re-established vendor trust, and helped coach the next team of professionals, not interns thrown into the fire, but real hires, properly trained. Then I walked away, this time by choice. No bitterness, just peace. Funny, isn't it? I was once replaced like I didn't matter, and yet when things fell apart, the one thing they needed most was me. Experience, it turns out, doesn't age out. It compounds. I'm now running my own consulting firm, working with clients who value clarity, loyalty, and long-term thinking. The kind of values that don't show up in flashy slides, but keep businesses alive. And to this day, I keep one reminder on my desk: a folded piece of paper that simply reads, "They thought I was gone. I was just getting started." Sometimes the people who get overlooked are the very ones holding everything together. If you've ever been cast aside, underestimated, or replaced without cause, know this: your value isn't defined by a title or a salary. It's defined by your impact, your integrity, and the people who remember you when things fall apart. Have you ever been pushed out unfairly, or watched someone you respect get replaced by someone cheaper, younger, or more modern? Share your story in the comments. Let's talk about it, because your voice deserves to be heard, and your story might just inspire someone to rise again.